Hi everybody, this is Marlene with EERIE News, and today is April 16, 2022, Saturday, April 16, 2022. And let's start off with true crime. True crime. This is a story out of the Independent. It's titled Unmasked I-65 Killer's Lazy Eye Sparks New Probe into His Links to Two More Murder Sprees, which I think is very unusual. The reason why I'm bringing it up is that the use of DNA is identifying or helping to close cold cases or link cases that previously were thought to be separate and apart. In other words, that chances are that they were the handiwork of a different perpetrator. Now with the use of DNA, sometimes you even have one case that was solved with a perpetrator identified, and then with the use of DNA, the second case that was cold is linked in. And this starts out with investigators from multiple states and agencies in the U.S. are digging into whether newly identified I-65 killer Harry Edward Greenwell, who claimed at least 3 known victims in the late 1980s, was also responsible for a series of highway murders in other parts of the country. Authorities last week announced that Greenwell, who died in Iowa in 2013 at the age of 68, had been identified through DNA evidence as the killer of female motel employees along I-65 in the Midwest. They suspected there could be more victims. So, the detective who had spent decades trying to catch serial killers in their own jurisdiction, but hadn't been involved in the I-65 investigation. They recognized the modus operandi. The victims resembled each other, and there was a composite sketch with eerily close details to those which had helped identify Greenwell, a traveling railway worker who'd served prison time but lived a quiet farmer's market frequenting life for decades before his death. We have to acknowledge that there are similarities, specifically the lazy eye. Captain Raymond Floyd of Investigative Services at the St. Charles, Missouri Police Department told the Independent. The composite of Greenwell, drawn up with the assistance of a surviving victim, showed a tall man with greasy gray hair, a beard, and a distinctive eye. A sketch of the I-70 suspect showed a white man with similar features and, again, against all odds, a droopy left eye. Greenwell's last known murder was in 1990. The I-70 killings occurred over a 29-day period just 2 years later. Greenwell was older and taller than reports of the I-70 killer, Captain Floyd says, but you can't disregard a potential suspect just based on a composite sketch or witness testimony itself. The victimology, time frame, and killing methods were too alike to dismiss, he adds. The murderer in both cases executed those ladies in a very similar fashion. By the time the later crimes were committed, however, Greenwell's life had changed. He had married a different woman from whom he hid the vast majority of his sordid past, and that could account for a change in his M.O. That woman, Greenwell's widow, Julie Jenkins, exclusively told the Independent last week that she'd had no inkling of his brutal crimes, but from her knowledge of serial killers believed there could be more victims out there. Captain Floyd, for his part, had been doggedly pursuing cold cases, particularly the I-70 serial killer, for some time. He hadn't heard of the I-65 killer or Greenwell until last week, when he started getting texts from other investigators reaching out to the FBI, along with Indiana and Kentucky authorities who had triumphantly announced the break in the I-65 case. The first woman known to be a victim of the I-65 killer was Vicki Heath, a 41-year-old mother of 2 who had recently got engaged before she was found dead beside the trash cans behind the Super 8 motel in Elizabethtown, Kentucky on February 21st, 1987. She had been assaulted and shot twice in the head with a .38 caliber pistol. The killer's second and third victims were both slain on the same day, March 3rd, 1989. Mary Peggy Gill, 24, a night auditor at a Days Inn motel in Merrillville, Indiana, was found dead in the building's parking lot by a passing motorist. Jean Gilbert, 34, a mother of two, who also worked as a part-time auditor at the Remington Days Inn, was also fatally shot with the same .22 caliber gun. The attacker had robbed both premises, making off with $426. A fourth woman, working the night shift at a Days Inn motel in Columbus, Indiana, was sexually assaulted and stabbed in 1990, but managed to escape the scene. That woman, named only as Jane Doe, gave police a composite sketch describing a man with greasy gray hair, a lazy green eye, and a beard. It's unclear how Greenwell could have gone undiscovered for the remainder of his life, or whether there are additional victims. He had, however, traveled throughout the Midwest while working on railroad tracks, his widow told The Independent. And that could perhaps explain some of the other unsolved highway killings within a few years of his verified murderous activity, piquing particular interest from Captain Floyd when he took on his new job in St. Charles last year. He'd already been committed to finding the I-70 killer months before the recent announcement, even hosting a multi-state agency event in November where investigators of different highway cases could compare notes and agreed to share information as their probes continued. With the blessings of the St. Charles Department, he said he looked to re-examine cold cases, taking advantage of the advancement of DNA. Samples from several scenes across different states are currently at various labs around the country as investigators wait to see with bated breath if the highway killings could be related. The announcement of the I-65 suspect came at a particular poignant time, the same week as the 30th anniversary of the first known killing attributed to the I-70 killer. Shoe store manager Robin Felder, 26, was fatally shot on April 8, 1992, at a Payless in Indianapolis. 3 days later, 23-year-old Patricia Smith and shop owner Patricia Magers, 32, were killed in a bridal store in Wichita, Kansas. About 2 weeks later, Indiana man Michael McGowan, 40, was shot and killed in his mother's ceramic store in Terre Haute, Indiana, because he reportedly wore a ponytail and was shot from behind. He could have been mistaken for a woman, in keeping with the patterns of both the I-65 and I-70 killers. Less than a week later, Nancy Kitzmiller, 24, was killed while working at another shoe store in St. Charles, where Captain Floyd now heads the police investigative services. Sarah Blessing, a 37-year-old who worked at a gift shop 3.5 hours away near the Kansas border, was found dead on May 7, 1992. 1 year later, 2 women were killed at separate places of work near I-35 in Texas, prompting detectives then and now to review whether the crimes were linked. Another woman was attacked but lived. We have been in touch with authorities in Texas, and we're comparing notes and some investigative leads that we've had. To me, the MO is very similar, and it's my understanding that the surviving victim in the Texas case did think the composite sketch of the I-70 killer looked like her attacker, Captain Floyd told The Independent. Most investigators are thinking about the families of the victims throughout everything they do, Captain Floyd says, adding that they want to achieve justice for Nancy and the other victims in this case. I think closure is not the right word. They may have a conclusion, and I know they seek to have the answers, but that's our motivation. He also hopes to bring solace to his fellow investigators who obsessed about the unknown killer for decades, particularly those who worked from his own department. He tells The Independent. St. Charles has invested 30 years in this case, he says. This case has never sat on a shelf. It's not just important to me. It's probably more important to the detectives working the case from the beginning. The identification of the I-65 killer, who'd been arrested for burglary and made at least 2 prison escape attempts before settling into a quiet life in Iowa, was made via familial DNA. It was a triumph of science technology, and also gave hope to other highway cold case detectives, particularly within a day's driving distance of his crimes. Anytime you see these cases being solved, they are 30, 40 years old. It definitely motivates you to try harder and to work harder, Captain Floyd told The Independent. He added, "It is 100% scary, because murder is fundamentally wrong. So there is no real good reason to do murder. Not that you can understand it, but you can see where someone in a domestic situation might wind up the victim of a murder or a drug dealer, something like that. Unfortunately, what we have on this I-70 case, the same with the I-65 case, is you have people that are really, really good people that weren't in those dangerous lifestyles, that just happened to be at the wrong place, at the wrong time, when the wrong individual came in. As Captain Floyd and authorities across multiple states try to connect the dots and bring solace to families, they're also waiting patiently for the DNA results. It's hit and miss, he tells The Independent. We're optimistic about it. We do think we have a chance of developing a suspect out of this, or we wouldn't be doing this. And it's really interesting because one of the points that they make here at the end about how these, obviously, it seems that this killer picked these locations because they were very close to highways. In other words, this would allow him to get out of the area very quickly. All right. Number one. Number two, though, this observation that these people were not involved in a risky lifestyle. They weren't in a place you shouldn't be where, God, maybe there's crime taking place. In other words, they were at work. They were normal, regular people going on about their lives. These women especially. And I want to say that it's almost as if he chose women, not the soft targets. You know, sometimes you hear about killers or serial killers that they will kill prostitutes, people involved in the drug trade because they're soft targets. Nobody will report them missing, or they might have a drug habit. They're alienated from their family of origin. In other words, there's nobody out to watch for them. So but in this case, I think he handpicked. Besides the actual location, I think he picked them because of the very fact that they were innocent, if you want to use that word, in almost it's, how can I say, murdering innocence as part of the murdering a woman kind of thing. And then you have to ask yourself, after doing all these, and that's another thing, which of course is what makes some of these cases so difficult to solve, is when it's a stranger on stranger crime. Here's a stranger who has no previous contact with this person, killing them for an unknown reason. Well, for an unknown reason in the sense of there's no motivation that sometimes you see in a murder, hatred, revenge, love, or obsession, things of this nature where sometimes murder are committed and there's some type of tie-in between the victim and the perpetrator. In these cases, there isn't. There isn't, and of course, the most important thing is where he was traveling around. In other words, it's very difficult when you have different jurisdictions to tie in these crimes as being done by the same person. And of course, if once he does the crime, if he leaves, that's it. He's gone. Even if he goes over to another town a few miles, that's it. So, and then and I imagine I can't be the only one wondering. Here he goes around killing, and then he settles into a life of, what do they call it? Farmer's market on the weekends lifestyle. Was he killing? Was he one of the, after he married, of course, was this person that he married somebody that kept him emotionally stable? Even though and before this, he was so full of, I don't know, hatred, rage, that he could only appease it by killing women randomly? Or did he continue, maybe not as often, killing people without his wife not being aware of it? Which, his widow, of course, now is saying, and like everything, this gentleman passed away in 2013. She's saying that what she knows of, she has no inkling, but what she knows of serial killers means that there's more victims. And I'm thinking to myself, If you know, I, I don't know, I think of my own relationship with my husband, and I would know if something was going on, that I find this very difficult unless he totally was not committing any crimes after the fact, that you could be so totally ignorant, especially if this person is doing something of this nature. I don't see where there's such a disconnect that you have no idea or no suspicion that the person that you're married to and living with could be committing atrocities of this nature. I could see where, okay, if maybe he has a troubled past, even if he was in jail and he hides it from her. And, there's people that, they maybe in their youth they were wild and crazy and now they've mended their ways and they decided, you know what, I don't want to live the rest of my life like this. But that's quite different from somebody that had a criminal history, plus was killing a lot of people along the way. This is a follow-up to that story. Also from the Independent, is the wife of I-65 serial killer reveals secret life that let him go undetected for decades. And she's quoted saying, "I'm lucky to be alive." Okay. Julie Jenkins, 73, was married to Harry Edward Greenwell for nearly 20 years until his death in 2013. 9 years later, she shares her shock at the news that Greenwell was behind the murder of three women in the 1980s and her fear there are more victims than currently known. Okay. The wife, okay, and by the way, if she, in other words, when she married him, she was 73. She was not a young girl when she married this man, I don't think. She, I don't know, let's see what she says. The wife of alleged I-65 serial killer Harry Edward Greenwell feels lucky to be alive. Julie Jenkins, 73, was married to Greenwell for nearly 20 years and totally blindsided by the multi-agency press conference on Tuesday naming her husband, who died in 2013, as the killer of at least three women along the Kentucky-Indiana border in the late 1980s. One thing that's going through my mind is that I guess I'm lucky to be alive. Miss Jenkins, a grandmother now living in Minnesota, told a newspaper, adding that she'd previously been in a relationship with a man who was abusive and almost killed me, and then Greenwell decided he would kill other people. That's horrible. She says she's feeling pretty dazed. I keep thinking about our life together, and he was kind, he was caring. He did have a temper, but that's not unusual. I don't think you kill people because you're mad at them, not strangers. I don't know what to think about much of it. Other than that, I feel horrible for the families that dealt with that for so many years, and I know there's nothing I can do. I'm sorry, I had no idea. When asked about authorities' suspicions her husband could have more victims, Miss Jenkins said, "It's certainly a possibility. When you know what you do about serial killers, they generally don't just stop. So I hope, no, I pray, that there aren't going to be more victims that he's linked to, but I fear there's a real possibility." She adds, "I'm sorry for those people as well. It makes me not trust my judgment." According to authorities, Greenwell, who was 68 when he died, was identified through genealogical investigation in all three deaths along the Indiana-Kentucky border. This technique involves uploading a crime scene DNA profile to one or more genetic genealogy databases in an attempt to identify a criminal offender's genetic relatives and locate the offender within their family tree. Indiana State Police said in a Tuesday release, utilizing this process, a match was made to Greenwell with a close family member. Through this match, it was determined that the probability of Greenwell being the person responsible for the attacks was more than 99.99%. The first woman known to be a victim of the I-65 killer was Vicki Heath, a 41-year-old mother of two who had recently become engaged before she was found dead beside the trash cans behind the Super 8 motel in Elizabethtown, Kentucky on February 21st, 1987. Okay, we went over that. The sketch was only clues for decades until DNA evidence. And let me tell you something, you look at that sketch, and maybe with the exception of the lazy eye, the green eyes with the lazy eye, he could have looked like a million got men. When Jenkins died in 2013, his obituary gave no inkling of his alleged sinister past. It described him as a family man, a farmer, a do-gooder, and his generous soul after he died in Iowa following a battle with cancer, writing he had many friends who loved his straight-up attitude and his willingness to help anyone. His spirit will live on in many by good deeds he offered, it continued, years before he was named as a serial killer. Born in Louisville, and one of more than half a dozen siblings, several of whom have also passed away, Greenwell worked for the Canadian Pacific Railroad, providing public safety for 30 years before retiring in 2010, the obituary read. Harry enjoyed organic gardening, selling his organic produce at the local farmers market, traveling, reading, wordsmithing, avid college sports fan, and selecting winning thoroughbred horses. At the time of his death, he was married to Miss Jenkins, who had 3 adult children of her own. Greenwell had his own son and daughter, in addition to living siblings, nieces, a nephew, great-nephews, and a great-niece. He loved to garden. He spent hours in his garden, Miss Jenkins tells The Independent, and he gathered everything and took it up to New Albany, Iowa on certain days and sold it to people. And I always figured that his biggest reason of taking it up to the farmer's market was to visit with everybody that came there. She says he sold everything that he grew, tomatoes, onions, carrots, beets, squash. Before his 2013 death, she says, they lived in a 3-bedroom farmhouse outside an Iowa town of about 300 people, and the home looked out onto a state highway. Ms. Jenkins says she had been contacted by an FBI agent earlier this year about Greenwell, who told her he had previously served time for robbery. She says she was completely flabbergasted by any suggestion he'd been involved in the murders of women. I couldn't imagine this of Harry, she told a newspaper, and I said, he's been dead for so long already. What would be the point now in dredging up old cases? And he said, don't you think the families have a right to know? And absolutely they do. I wasn't even thinking of them at the time. I can't imagine what they've gone through all these years, which is horrible in itself. She says she told the FBI where to find Greenwell's biological son. The alleged serial killer had been married twice previously, adopting one wife's daughter and fathering a son with the other. His first wife died in a house fire before Miss Jenkins met him at a Minnesota bar. I was very suspicious at first, coming from an abusive relationship, but he assured me that the death of his ex-wife was not the case, Miss Jenkins said, and of course I believed him. I guess I still do. He was off working at a railroad. I think it was over in Wisconsin when it happened. She was in Wisconsin too, but they were across the state from each other, from what I remember. I do believe it was accidental or negligence on her part. She had no reason, she says, to be wary of Greenwell at all. He was supportive through her battle with breast cancer and loving to her family. Despite his criminal history, she says, he just told me it existed, and I thought it was okay. People change, and so you just give people a second chance. And okay, robbery is not cool, but he paid his time. Greenwell, who was 4 years older than his third wife, seemed penitent as he was dying from lung cancer, she says, though she had no idea about what exactly. When he was in hospice, he asked for a priest, and a priest came, says Miss Jenkins, who, unlike her husband, is not Catholic. I presumed it was for confession, but I doubt that he confessed this. She says, I just assumed that the priest would be obligated to tell somebody he did this, if he did do this, though Catholic priests are forbidden from sharing anything told to them during the sacrosanct sacrament of confession. My other thought since learning of the serial killing allegations was, if he didn't confess, what was the point of confessing to anything else? Because that would have trumped anything, Miss Jenkins says. Miss Jenkins says that after her initial contact with the FBI, she heard no more about her late husband's alleged crimes until this week's press conference. My son actually was aware of it first, she told a newspaper. He called me home from work and opened it up for me to watch the news conference. And I just feel horrible for those poor families that lost their mothers, their sisters, their children. Had I known anything, if I'd had any inkling, I certainly would not have been silent about it. But I didn't. She adds, it's terrifying, and my children feel the same way. I mean, I left them alone with him when I was at work. I live with my son and his family, and I have a grandchild who Harry thought was pretty special. They had a connection. She says that her 17-year-old granddaughter is pretty devastated about it. I told her last night, Miss Jenkins tells the newspaper, with the internet you can't protect children anymore. So I figured she needed to hear it from me rather than anyone else. Friends and family have been suitably shocked, she adds, though she has not yet spoken to Greenwell's son, siblings, or extended family. I expect I'll reach out and discuss it with them as much as they would want to. But yesterday, I just didn't have the energy. She says, in addition to reeling from the news, her foremost thoughts are with the family of the victim, she adds. It was kind of a sucker punch when the FBI contacted me, she says. I thought, well, this can't be real. This can't be, but then that agent mentioned family has a right to know, and I thought, absolutely they do. So I did what I could to point them in the right direction, and then I didn't hear any more, and then I almost forgot about it. I just want the families of the victims to know how sorry I am for what they've gone through. If there had been anything I would have known to alter the situation before this, I certainly would have done it. I don't know that they wanted to reach out to me for anything. I certainly would not be adverse to that happening. Of the avid, kind gardener she thought she'd married, she says, I guess you think you know somebody. I thought I knew him, but apparently I didn't know him very well. Okay. My own personal, it's not coincidental that he found a woman who came from an abusive background. And I don't know. I just think at this point, in that initial reaction that she had to the FBI agent, why dredge it up? I don't know. Almost like I don't want to talk about it because maybe I know something. I don't know. There's something there but who, at this point, he's been dead almost 10 years. But still, makes me wonder if she didn't know something, what she suspected of, and how all of a sudden he went from being a multi-state serial killer to I'm going to grow organic vegetables and sell them at the farmer's market. Beware the organic farmers. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Anyway, let's get on to something totally different. This is out of Life Science. This is a UFO story titled UFOs Left Radiation Burns and Unaccounted for Pregnancies, New Pentagon Report Claims. 1,500 pages of UFO-related research were just declassified as part of a FOIA request. Encounters with UFOs have reportedly left Americans suffering from radiation, burns, brain and nervous system damage, and even unaccounted for pregnancy, according to a massive database of U.S. government reports recently made through a Freedom of Information Act FOIA request. The database of documents includes more than 1,500 pages of UFO-related material from the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a secretive U.S. Department of Defense program that ran from 2007 to 2012. Despite never being classified as secret or top secret, the ATIP only became known to the public in 2017, when former program director Luis Elizondo resigned from the Pentagon and released several now infamous videos of an unidentified craft moving in seemingly impossible ways to the media. Shortly after the ATIP's existence was revealed, the U.S. outpost of the British tabloid The Sun filed a FOIA request for any and all documents related to the program. 4 years later, on April 5, 2022, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency honored the request by releasing more than 1,574 pages of material to The Sun. According to The Sun, the cache of documents includes reports on the biological effects of UFO sightings on humans, studies in advanced technologies such as invisibility cloaks, and plans for deep space exploration and colonization. Some portions of the documents were withheld in part for privacy and confidentiality concerns, the ATIP told The Sun. One standout document from the collection is a report titled Anomalous Acute and Subacute Field Effects on Human and Biological Tissues, dated March of 2010. The report describes alleged injuries to human observers by anomalous advanced aerospace systems, some of which may be a threat to United States interests, according to the document. The report describes 42 cases from medical files and 300 unpublished cases where humans sustained injuries after alleged encounters with anomalous vehicles, which include UFOs. In some cases, humans showed burn injuries or other conditions related to electromagnetic radiation, the report said, some of them appearing to have been inflicted by energy-related propulsion systems. The report also noted cases of brain damage, nerve damage, heart palpitations, and headaches related to anomalous vehicle encounters. It is unclear what kind of vetting process, if any, the ATIP used to investigate these alleged cases. The Sun has yet to share the full contents of the requested reports. The report also includes a list of alleged biological effects of UFO sightings on human observers between 1873 and 1994, compiled by the Mutual UFO Network MUFON, a civilian nonprofit group that studies reported UFO sightings. The reported effects of UFO encounters include unaccounted for pregnancy, apparent abduction, paralysis, and experiences of perceived telepathy, teleportation, and levitation. The report concludes that there is sufficient evidence to support a hypothesis that some advanced systems are already deployed and opaque to full U.S. understandings. Interesting. Very interesting. However, I still have one question. Why now? Why all of this vomiting forth of information and disclosures and tests and or studies and films when since the 1940s there have been investigations outside of the government as to sightings, and I'm glad that there's disclosure, but at the very time, I'm very suspicious of the timing on this. And I'm hoping that, remember, back in even the 70s and 80s, where they put out the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a great movie, but in the end, the ETs they're friendly. In other words, we're able to communicate with them via musical chords or notes, and there's an exchange of humans. And in other words, they're friendly, all right. And then of course, ET the extraterrestrial phone home. That was the cutie. And then all of a sudden, now we're looking at contact with UFOs and or ETs as God being the cause of very serious physical harm. And let's not even look at and I guess what I'm going with this is that I'm hoping that we're not going in the direction of an extraterrestrial, attack kind of thing. I just really hope that that's not it, because I think that for as long as this has been investigated by different agencies, as like he said, like MUFON, by investigative reporters and everything, all of a sudden they want to give everything plus, 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 plus. Oh, let's move on now to this is out of the Smithsonian Mag, The Ancient Origins of the Easter Bunny. And let's see, I think this is very interesting. And the reason why I say this is one of my children was born on Palm Sunday, and his birthday was always very, very close to Easter, depending on so when I would celebrate his birthday, I would always have an Easter egg hunt as part of the birthday party. All right. So I find this so interesting as far as, among Christians, Easter is seen as the resurrection of Jesus Christ after he's crucified. But then, of course, there's the overlapping celebration of eggs. So let's see. The Easter Bunny is a much celebrated character in American Easter celebrations. On Easter Sunday, children look for hidden special treats, often chocolate Easter eggs, that the Easter Bunny might have left behind. As a folklorist, I am aware, as in the writer, of the origins of the long and interesting journey this mythical figure has taken from European prehistory to today. Easter is a celebration of spring and new life. Eggs and flowers are rather obvious symbols of female fertility, but in European traditions, the bunny with its amazing reproductive potential is not far behind. In European traditions, the Easter bunny is known as the Easter hare. The symbolism of the hare has had many tantalizing ritual and religious roles down through the years. Hares were given ritual burials alongside humans during the Neolithic age in Europe. Archaeologists have interpreted this as a religious ritual, with hares representing rebirth. Over 1,000 years later, during the Iron Age, ritual burials for hares were common, and in 51 BC, Julius Caesar mentioned that in Britain, hares were not eaten due to their religious significance. Caesar would likely have known that in the classical Greek tradition, hares were sacred to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Meanwhile, Aphrodite's son Eros was often depicted carrying a hare as a symbol of unquenchable desire. From the Greek world through the Renaissance, hares often appear as symbols of sexuality in literature and art. For example, the Virgin Mary is often shown with a white hare or rabbit, symbolizing that she overcame sexual temptation. But it is the folk traditions of England and Germany that the figure of the hare is specifically connected to Easter. Accounts from the 1600s in Germany describe children hunting for Easter eggs hidden by the Easter hare, much as in the United States today. Written accounts from England around the same time also mention the Easter hare, particularly in terms of traditional Easter hare hunts and the eating of hare meat at Easter. One tradition known as the hare pie scramble was held at Hallaton, a village in Leicestershire, England. It involved eating a pie made with hare meat and people scrambling for a slice. In 1790, the local parson tried to stop the custom due to its pagan associations, but he was unsuccessful and the custom continued in that village until this day. The eating of the hare may have been associated with various long-standing folk traditions of scaring away witches at Easter. Throughout Northern Europe, folk traditions record a strong belief that witches would often take the form of a hare, usually for causing mischief such as stealing milk from neighbors' cows. Witches in medieval Europe were said to be able to suck out life energy of others, making them ill. The idea that the witches of winter should be banished at Easter is a common European folk motive, appearing in several festivities and rituals. The spring equinox, with its promise of new life, was held symbolically in opposition to the life-draining activities of witches and winter. This idea provides the underlying rationale behind various festivities and rituals such as the Osterfeuer or Easter fire, a celebration in Germany involving large outdoor bonfires meant to scare away witches. In Sweden, popular folklore states that at Easter, the witches all fly away on their broomsticks to feast and dance with the devil on the legendary island of Blakula in the Baltic Sea. In 1835, folklorist Jacob Grimm, one of the famous team of the fairy tale brothers Grimm, argued that the Easter hare was connected to a goddess he imagined would have been called Ostara in ancient German. He derived this name from the Anglo-Saxon goddess Ostari, whom Bede, an early medieval monk, considered to be the father of English history, mentioned in 731 AD. Bede noted that in 8th century England, the month of April was called Erstomonth, or Ostermonth, after the goddess Isteri. He wrote that a pagan festival of spring in the name of the goddess had become assimilated into the Christian celebration of the resurrection of Christ. While most European languages refer to the Christian holiday with names that come from the Jewish holiday of Passover, such as Pakers in French or Pasch in Swedish, German and English languages retain this older, non-biblical word, Easter. Recent archaeological research appears to confirm the worship of Oster in parts of England and Germany, with the hare as her main symbol. The Easter bunny therefore seems to recall these pre-Christian celebrations of spring, heralded by the vernal equinox and personified by the goddess Astarte. After a long, cold northern winter, it seems natural enough for people to celebrate themes of resurrection and rebirth. The flowers are blooming, birds are laying eggs, and baby bunnies are hopping about. As new life emerges in spring, the Easter bunny hops back once again, providing a long-standing cultural symbol to remind us of the cycles and stages of our own lives. I think that is so interesting because, of course, Easter, new life, and of course, it's tied into woman's fertility. Okay, because a woman has her own cycle, so yeah, everything overlaps one to the other. Next article is out of Daily Mail. It's titled Mysterious Sarcophagus Found in Notre-Dame Cathedral After it was devastated by a 2019 fire will be opened to reveal its secrets. A mysterious sarcophagus discovered in the bowels of Paris's Notre-Dame Cathedral after it was devastated by a fire in 2019 will soon be opened to reveal its secrets. French archaeologists made the announcement on Thursday, just a day before the third anniversary of the infernal Gothic landmark, which shocked the world and led to a massive reconstruction project. During preparatory work to rebuild the church's ancient spire last month, workers found the well-preserved leaden sarcophagus buried 65 feet underground, lying amongst the brick pipes of a 19th century heating system, but is believed to be much older, possibly from the 14th century. Interesting. Scientists have already peered inside the sarcophagus using an endoscopic camera, revealing the upper part of a skeleton, a pillow of leaves, perhaps hair, textiles, and dry organic matter. The sarcophagus, which is 6 foot 4 inches long and 1 foot 6 inches wide, was extracted from the cathedral on Tuesday, France's INRAP National Archaeological Research Institute said during a press conference. It is currently being held in a secure location and will be sent very soon to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in the southwestern city of Toulouse. Forensic experts and scientists will then open the sarcophagus and study its contents to identify the skeleton's gender and former state of health, lead archaeologist Christophe Besnier said, adding that carbon dating technology could be used. Noting that it was found under a mound of earth that had furniture from the 14th century, Besnier said, if it turns out that it is in fact a sarcophagus from the Middle Ages, we are dealing with an extremely rare burial practice. They also hope to determine the social rank of the deceased. Given the place and style of burial, they were likely to be among the elite of their time, with their name perhaps appearing in the register of the burials of the diocese. However, INRAP head Dominique Garcia emphasized that the body will be examined in compliance with French laws regarding human remains. A human body is not an archaeological object. He said, as human remains, the civil code applies and archaeologists will study it as such. Once they have finished studying the sarcophagus, it will be returned not as an archaeological object but as an anthropological asset, Garcia added. However, it has not yet been decided whether Notre-Dame will serve as its final resting place. INRAP said the possibility of reinterment in the cathedral was being studied. The sarcophagus is not the only notable discovery at Notre-Dame. Archaeologists have also unearthed a treasure trove of statues, sculptures, tombs, and pieces of an original rood screen dating back to the 13th century. Until now, only a few pieces remained of the rood, an ornate partition between the chancel and nave that separated the clergy and choir from the congregation. Some of these are in the cathedral storerooms, while others are now on show in the Louvre. In Catholic churches, most were removed during the Counter-Reformation in the 16th and 17th century. However, large pieces of the Notre-Dame rood appear to have been carefully interred under the cathedral floor during the building's restoration by Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who added the spire in the mid-19th century. These included sculpted and polychrome fragments, figures, and religious architectural elements. One of the most extraordinary pieces is an intact sculpture of the head of a man, believed to be a representation of Jesus. The style of the sculpture and decoration suggests they date back to the 13th century. Unlike those preserved in the Louvre, however, these fragments are more brightly painted. Wow. The find includes around 10 plaster sarcophagi from the Middle Ages, most of which have been badly damaged by flues. In one of them, however, remains of fabric embroidered with gold thread, and some bones were found. At least 4 graves in the ground have also been identified. We uncovered all these riches just 10 to 15 centimeters under the floor slabs, said Christophe Besnier, who headed the scientific team for the dig. It was completely unexpected. There were exceptional pieces documenting the history of the monument. It was an emotional moment. Suddenly, we had several hundred pieces, from small fragments to large blocks, included sculpted hands, feet, faces, architectural decorations, and plants. Some of the pieces were still colored. Wow. Today marks the 3 years to the day since the fire ripped through Notre-Dame, quickly spreading along the roof structure and causing burning timbers to collapse into the ceiling of the vault below. By the time the fire was extinguished, the building's spire had collapsed. Most of its roof had been destroyed, and its upper walls were severely damaged. Extensive damage to the interior was prevented by its stone-vaulted ceiling, which largely contained the burning roof as it collapsed. The excavation, which has just been completed, will now give way to a long period of analysis and study to better identify and date the furniture, organic remains, DNA, and other materials that have been unearthed. Wow. This is so interesting. I can't wait to see what's in, well, not what, who is in that sarcophagus. And the last story is out of the BBC, titled "Does Spain Have the Holy Grail?" Spain's Valencia Cathedral houses a relic that may be the Holy Chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper, as the right size material in history. The Holy Grail, a sacred cup Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, is one of the most well-known symbols in Christianity. It's also one of the religion's greatest sources of myth and mystery. Yet despite the Grail's fame, no one is entirely sure where it is or whether it ever existed. However, in Spain, Valencia Cathedral believes it has the real thing. "I always say the evidence is like twigs from a tree," said José Verdaguer, Valencia Cathedral's historical artistic heritage curator. "If you only have one stick, it breaks easily, but if you join 50 together, you can no longer break them. Here there are many arguments together, and it is no longer easy to break them." Verdaguer was referring to a collection of evidence that some believe proves the authenticity of the chalice on view at the cathedral. The Grail itself is comprised of two parts: a cup made of reddish-brown agate stone and a carved gold reliquary into which the cup is set. In the 1960s, an archaeological study concluded that the cup portion dated back to the 2nd or 1st century BC and was made by hand in a location between ancient Palestine and Egypt, the only place where that type of agate is found. Via her research, art historian and author Dr. Anna Maffei learned that the gold stand dated to the 11th century, suggesting that the artisans of that time knew that the top cup was a special relic and wanted to showcase it. Dr. Maffei's research also determined that the chalice is the same size and volume as a traditional Jewish Kiddush cup, a blessing cup, which is what Jesus would have used at the Last Supper. To explain how the Grail made its way from Jerusalem to Valencia, Verdaguer refers to the Christian belief that the Last Supper took place in the house of St. Mark, a disciple of St. Peter. He posts that when St. Mark had to flee Jerusalem in 70 AD due to the Roman invasion, he took the valuable cup with him. From there, St. Mark settled in Rome, where the cup was passed on to various popes and eventually to St. Lawrence, who sent it to Spain for safekeeping from the further wars. Eventually, it ended up in Valencia, the capital of the Kingdom of Aragon, in the 1400s. Since then, the revered relic has had a place of honor in the cathedral, and although it's only been used to celebrate Mass by Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, it can be viewed by all visitors along with the cathedral's other relics, which include a supposed thorn from Jesus' crown and a piece of the cross on which he was crucified. If there's any chalice that, according to tradition, was in the hands of Jesus, without a doubt, the only cup that fulfills all the requirements, when subjected to a scientific analysis that can be replicated anywhere in the world with the same results, is the Holy Chalice of the Valencia Cathedral, said Dr. Maffei. Very interesting. Okay, so that's it for today. I will be back soon with more interesting stories. And until then, happy Easter and see you soon.